Because the House Judiciary Committee is now voting on the articles of impeachment against President Trump. Two articles at issue, one for abuse of power, the second for obstruction of Congress. The roll call now in that Judiciary Committee, divided along party lines on the article of abuse of power. Let's listen.
Votes no. Mr. Buck?
No.
Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Radcliffe?
No.
Mr. Radcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby?
No.
Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no.
So
Mr.
far,
Johnson
every
of
Democrat
Louisiana
has voted
No.
yes.
Mr. Johnson of
Every
Louisiana
Republican
votes
voted no.
Mr. Biggs?
No.
Again, this is
Mr.
on
Biggs
abuse of
votes
power
no.
related to the president's
Mr. McClintock?
No.
crushing of Ukraine
Mr. McClintock votes no.
to announce
Ms.
investigations into
No.
Joe Biden and the
Ms.
Democrats,
Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
withholding a White House
Mr.
meeting,
Reschenthaler votes no.
and according to Democrats,
Mr. Klein?
close to $400 million in military
Mr.
aid.
Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
All right, guys, welcome to Dr. John Podcast. So what just happened, guys? Impeachment papers are being rushed into Congress as lawmakers from both parties stand together demanding Trump step down. Not eventually, not after deliberation, but immediately, before the constitutional damage becomes permanent. The scene at the Capitol complex has transformed into something that veteran observers compare to the most consequential moments in American legislative history.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask how I'm recorded?
How is the gentleman recorded?
Mr. Gohmert, you are recorded as no.
Yeah, I want to make sure.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 23 ayes and 17 noes.
The article is agreed to. The question now is on Article 2 of the resolution, impeaching President Donald J. Trump for obstructing Congress. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
So there you have it. The House Judiciary
Mr.
Committee has
Nadler
now
votes
approved
aye.
an article of impeachment against President
Loeffler?
Trump.
Aye.
Ms. Loeffler
Tara Moran
votes
there
aye.
on Capitol Hill as they're voting on the
Jackson
second
Lee
article
votes
for
aye. Ms.
obstruction
Jackson
of
Lee
Congress.
votes aye.
This is now the
Mr.
fourth
Cullen?
time in American history the House Judiciary
Cullen
Committee has
votes aye.
voted articles of impeachment
Mr.
out
Johnson of Georgia?
against the sitting president.
Mr. Johnson
It
of
is,
Georgia
and it is
votes
a
aye.
historic moment taken along strict party lines, and that is an achievement of the president. It has to be considered that way. When this story broke and the transcript of that phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky came to light, you saw some Republicans up here waver a bit. They called it troubling in public. They said it was not okay. But because of the president's very staunch defense of his own behavior, because of the natural partisanship that boils over on this in this Capitol every day, they are now a strict party line vote. That call was perfect. That is the Republican defense line of the president.
You have to picture what's happening right now. Lawmakers who normally operate on carefully managed schedules are improvising press conferences in corridors. Staff members are sprinting through hallways, carrying newly drafted documents fresh from the printers. Security has been elevated to levels not seen since the darkest days of previous national crises. Outside the building, crowds have gathered in numbers that have law enforcement on maximum alert. Some demonstrators are there to demand accountability. Others are there to defend the president. The two groups are separated by barricades and police lines, but the tension between them is palpable, electric, dangerous. Everyone remembers what happened the last time a massive crowd gathered at this building with Donald Trump at the center of controversy. Nobody wants to see history repeat itself, and yet the conditions feel hauntingly familiar. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere is even more intense. Representatives are taking to the floor one after another, delivering speeches that will be quoted in history books.
No more wavering, no more troubled reflection on whether or not we want presidents to do this with foreign leaders. You are watching right now a political accomplishment by President Trump in this party line vote, and he's praising them as warriors.
On the House Judiciary Committee, the second article now being voted on.
Ms. McBath
Democrats
votes
have again
aye.
all voted aye.
Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. McCarcel-Powell?
Aye.
Ms. McCarcel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no.
And you hear again those
Mr.
Republicans
Sensenbrenner?
voting no. John
Mr.
Carl, as
Sensenbrenner votes
Chair
no.
Moran just said, perhaps a
Shabbat?
political achievement
Mr.
for the
Shabbat
president
votes no.
to hold his party
Gohmert?
together, at least
No.
on this vote.
Mr. Gohmert
So far,
votes
of course,
no.
a trial is coming in the Senate,
Jordan?
and so far it appears
Mr.
that he
Jordan
has
votes
strong
no.
support, if not unanimous
Buck?
support, among Senate Republicans
Buck votes
as
no.
well. But this was
Mr.
still a
Radcliffe?
mark he does not
Mr.
want on his
Radcliffe
record.
votes no.
A mark he does not want on his record. He goes down in history. This is the beginning of the process of him going down in history as only the third president to be impeached. Of course, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, obviously resigning before it reached this level. This is something the president did not want, a mark, a scar on his legacy. But I have to completely agree with Terry Moran. This is a victory of sorts for the president, and that it is.
Some are angry, their voices rising as they catalog what they describe as unforgivable violations of constitutional duty. Others are sorrowful, speaking quietly about their love for the country and their fear for its immediate future. A few have been visibly emotional, choking up as they describe the oath they swore to defend the Constitution and how that oath now compels them to do something they never imagined they would have to do. These are not performances. Whatever you think of politicians generally, the raw emotion on display right now is genuine.
A purely party line vote. It enables the White House to say this is a partisan process. This is the president's political opponents going into an election year trying to put a stain on his legacy and perhaps on his chances for re-election, although I have to say Republicans feel pretty good right now where they are.
And the second article has now been voted on.
The resolution is amended as ordered, reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Pursuant to Clause 2L of Rule 11, I give notice of intent to file dissenting views.
Notice is heard. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
So there you have it. The House Judiciary Committee has now voted out, approved 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald John Trump. In fact, that is how the final resolution does read. Donald John Trump has been impeached on those 2 articles. Only change made in the committee started changing it from Donald J. Trump.
These are people who believe with absolute conviction that they are living through a hinge point in American history, and they are not wrong. What makes this moment fundamentally different from the previous 2 impeachment efforts is the bipartisan nature of the push. During the first impeachment, the votes fell almost entirely along party lines. Democrats pushed for accountability. Republicans circled the wagons. A handful of defectors made headlines, but the overall dynamic was unmistakably partisan. Trump survived by dismissing the whole thing as a political witch hunt, and his base accepted that framing because
to Donald John Trump, but there you see it, 2 strict party line votes on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. This vote, these articles of impeachment will now go to the House floor. That is likely to be voted on by midweek before Christmas. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said she wants to move for a quick vote. President Trump has also said he wants a quick trial in the Senate. With that, he has agreement from the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, as well. We will likely be coming back at the first of the year for that trial of President Trump on these 2 articles of impeachment. The next step, the House floor, that is next week. We're going to return now to regular programming. For many of you, that is Good Morning America.
Honestly, when only one party is coming after you, the claim of partisanship has at least surface-level plausibility. The second impeachment followed a similar pattern, though a few more Republicans broke ranks in the aftermath of January 6th. But both times, the core structure held. Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, Trump in the middle, playing the victim card with devastating effectiveness. This time is different. This time, Republican lawmakers are standing at microphones and telling the American people that enough is enough, not mumbling quiet concerns behind closed doors, not leaking anonymous quotes to friendly reporters, standing publicly, looking into cameras, and saying that this president, their party's president, has gone too far, that the constitutional violations have become too severe to ignore, that the obstruction of justice has become too blatant to excuse, that the defiance of court orders has become too dangerous to tolerate. These are people who defended Trump through every previous scandal, who stood by him during controversies that would have destroyed any other political career. And now they're breaking ranks, publicly, emphatically, irreversibly. Listen to the language these Republican lawmakers are using. They are not hedging. They are not couching their statements in careful political ambiguity. They are being direct to the point of brutality about what they believe is at stake. They are using phrases like constitutional breakdown as a real and immediate possibility. They are warning of irreparable damage to American democracy if Congress fails to act decisively. These are not words chosen lightly by politicians who understand that every public statement will be preserved forever and used against them in future primary campaigns. When lawmakers start using language like irreparable damage to the republic, they have moved beyond political calculation into something much more fundamental. They have concluded that the survival of the constitutional system itself is on the line, and that their oath of office leaves them no choice but to act, regardless of the political consequences. Some of these Republicans are undoubtedly ending their careers by taking this stand. They know that. They have said as much in interviews. They understand that Trump's base will never forgive them. They understand that primary challengers are already being recruited. They understand that the fundraising spigots that sustain their campaigns may be turned off permanently. And they are doing it anyway because they believe, genuinely believe, that the alternative is watching the entire framework of American governance collapse under the weight of presidential lawlessness. That is not hyperbole. That is the actual assessment of people who have spent their entire careers in politics and who do not use apocalyptic language casually. The numbers tell their own story, and it is a story that should make everyone sit up and pay attention. More than 120 members of the House of Representatives have now publicly declared their support for immediate impeachment. That is a substantial block, more than enough to create serious momentum, but what makes it remarkable is the composition. These are not just Democrats doing what Democrats have always done. There are Republicans in that number. Multiple Republicans who have looked at the evidence, assessed the situation, and concluded that their party loyalty cannot extend to defending the indefensible. And in the Senate, where conviction requires a 2/3 supermajority that has never been achieved in any presidential impeachment trial, at least 7 Republican senators have already signaled their willingness to consider removal. 7. That number may not sound like much, but in the context of Senate impeachment trials, it represents a seismic shift. Remember, during the first Trump impeachment trial, only 1 Republican senator, Mitt Romney, voted to convict on even a single article. 1. The rest held the line. Now we are talking about 7 who are publicly open to removal, with more potentially waiting in the wings, watching to see how the evidence unfolds during trial, ready to join if the case proves as damning as the articles suggest. And those numbers are not static. They are growing by the hour. Every time a new detail emerges from the investigation, every time another Supreme Court ruling strips away another layer of presidential immunity claims, every time a federal judge issues another contempt warning, more lawmakers reach their breaking point. The dam is not just leaking anymore. It is developing cracks that are spreading in every direction. The articles of impeachment themselves are devastating documents. They cite multiple recent actions, not just historical grievances. Defiance of Supreme Court rulings. Trump continuing to claim powers the court has explicitly said he does not have. Continuing to issue executive orders the court has blocked. Refusing to accept judicial limitations on his authority. Obstruction of justice. The pattern of defying court orders, violating gag orders, potentially destroying evidence, interfering with investigations. Constitutional violations. The broader claim that Trump has systematically exceeded presidential authority, violated separation of powers, and undermined the rule of law. These charges are not abstract. They are tied to specific conduct, specific dates, specific documented instances where the president placed himself above the law and dared anyone to stop him. What lawmakers demanding immediate action want is simple in concept but extraordinary in practice. They want to skip the usual drawn-out process. No more months of committee hearings, no more endless deliberations about procedure and precedent, no more delays designed to run out the clock. They want the articles of impeachment brought directly to the House floor for an immediate up or down vote. Every member of Congress forced to stand up and be counted. Every vote recorded for history to judge. Every representative required to look their constituents in the eye and explain why they stood for accountability or why they chose to defend conduct that multiple federal judges have already deemed beyond the pale. That is the demand echoing through the Capitol corridors right now. No hiding, no procedural escape hatches, no running out the clock, just a straight vote on whether the evidence warrants removing this president from power. The parliamentary mechanics of how this works are worth understanding because the process matters almost as much as the outcome. Impeachment in the House requires a simple majority vote. If more than half of the members present and voting support the articles, Trump is impeached again, for the 3rd time. That vote seems increasingly certain given the number of public commitments already made. The real drama will be in the Senate. Conviction and removal require 2/3 of the senators present, that is 67 if all 100 senators are there. Historically, that threshold has been impossible to reach. Presidents have been impeached before, but never convicted and removed. The numbers were never there. But right now, with 7 Republican senators already indicating they might vote to convict, the math is no longer absurd. It would require essentially every Democrat plus those 7 Republicans, and possibly a few more who have not yet announced their position. That is a heavy lift. It is not the most likely outcome. But for the first time in American history, it is genuinely plausible that a president could be removed through the impeachment process. And if conviction actually happens, the consequences are immediate and absolute. There is no appeals process, no Supreme Court review, no do-over. The moment the Senate votes to convict, Trump is removed from office. The vice president is sworn in as president. The transition of power in a constitutional sense happens instantly. The removed president loses all authority, all privileges, all access to the levers of executive power, and the Senate could take an additional vote to bar him from ever holding federal office again, ensuring that this chapter of American political history is permanently closed. That is the endgame. That is what the lawmakers pushing for impeachment are actually trying to achieve. Not just a symbolic rebuke, not just a mark on a legacy. Actual removal from power through the constitutional mechanism designed for exactly this purpose. But here is where the uncertainty gets genuinely frightening. What happens if Trump refuses to accept removal? What if he claims the impeachment was illegitimate, that the votes were coerced, that the deep state orchestrated the whole thing? What if he simply declines to leave the White House? This is the nightmare scenario that constitutional scholars have been whispering about for years. A president who has been constitutionally removed but who rejects the legitimacy of that removal. A situation where the legal president and the former president both claim authority. A crisis that would have to be resolved through means that no one wants to contemplate. The Secret Service would face an impossible dilemma. Federal agencies would have to choose which president to obey. The military would have to determine where its constitutional obligations actually lie. This is the kind of scenario that happens in fragile democracies overseas, not in the United States of America. And yet, here we are, discussing it as a genuine possibility because the person at the center of this crisis has demonstrated repeatedly that he does not accept outcomes he does not like. The convergence of factors that brought us to this moment is almost overwhelming to catalog. Supreme Court rulings have systematically dismantled Trump's claims of presidential immunity. Decision after decision has made clear that the president is not a monarch, that executive power has limits, that court orders must be obeyed, that the rule of law applies to everyone, including the person temporarily occupying the Oval Office. Each ruling has been a body blow to Trump's legal defenses, and critically, each one has been defied, dismissed, or ignored, which has only made the case for removal more urgent. When a president treats Supreme Court decisions as optional suggestions rather than binding commands, the constitutional order itself begins to fracture. Evidence from the special counsel investigations has been methodically assembled, painting a picture of conduct that goes far beyond what was previously known. We are talking about documentary evidence, official communications, records maintained by federal agencies with chain of custody protocols designed for courtroom durability, timestamps and digital signatures that make authenticity challenges nearly impossible. This is the kind of evidence that prosecutors build entire careers around. And according to multiple reports, it shows a level of coordination and foreknowledge that directly contradicts years of claims about spontaneity and surprise. The details that have leaked into public view have been enough to shift the calculations of lawmakers who have spent years defending Trump against every accusation imaginable. Federal judges have been issuing contempt warnings that would have been unthinkable in any previous administration. Judges who have grown visibly frustrated with what they perceive as deliberate stonewalling and defiance. Judges who have started using words like willful and flagrant to describe the conduct they are seeing. Judges who have threatened sanctions, including the possibility of jail time for contempt. When federal judges start talking about jailing the president's attorneys for their conduct in court, the system is sending a signal that cannot be ignored. These judges are not political actors. They are not elected officials worried about the next election. They are lifetime appointees whose only currency is their legal reasoning and their institutional credibility. When they start sounding alarms, people pay attention. Members of Congress certainly pay attention. The political dimensions of all this are absolutely staggering. We are watching this unfold while Trump occupies the White House. A sitting president is facing federal criminal charges backed by evidence that career prosecutors are calling ironclad. The optics of this are unprecedented in American history. We have never been in a situation where the person currently running the country is simultaneously fighting a criminal case with this level of documentation arrayed against them. Depending on your political perspective, you are either watching justice finally catch up to someone who has evaded accountability for decades, or you are witnessing the most brazen weaponization of the legal system ever conceived. There is almost nobody in the middle. That is the reality we are living in. Two completely different interpretations of the same set of facts, and absolutely no bridge between them. Public trust in the Department of Justice has been eroding for years, with recent polling showing confidence levels scraping historic lows. Huge swaths of the population already believe the system is rigged, that prosecutions are politically motivated, that the powerful get different treatment than everyone else. Dropping this evidence right now does not just pour gasoline on that fire, it detonates the entire gas station. If you believe Trump has been unfairly targeted, this looks like the deep state making its final desperate move. If you believe he has been skating on thin ice for years, this looks like the reckoning that was always coming. Neither side is going to convince the other. Both sides will see exactly what they expected to see. And that means whatever happens in court, the social and political damage is already done. The division, the distrust, the sense that we are living in parallel realities with no shared foundation of truth. That is baked in now, irreversible. The international community is watching with a mixture of fascination and alarm. American allies are worried about what this means for global stability, for treaty commitments, for the reliability of American leadership. American adversaries are taking notes, looking for opportunities to exploit, calculating how a distracted and divided America changes the geopolitical landscape. The image of the United States as a stable, mature democracy has been taking hits for years. This moment, whatever the outcome, will either partially restore that image or further damage it. The world is watching to see whether the American system can actually enforce its own rules against its most powerful person. That is a test that most countries never face, and honestly, most countries that do face it do not pass. There is also a deeper question about what this means for the rule of law in America. We are watching in real time the judicial system attempt to enforce its norms against powerful actors who are determined to resist. This is a stress test of institutional integrity. Can courts actually compel compliance when the parties before them have political power, media platforms, and millions of supporters? Or will the enforcement mechanisms prove inadequate when the targets are wealthy, connected, and determined to fight? The impeachment push represents Congress reaching for its most potent weapon. If that weapon proves effective, if Trump faces real consequences, it reinforces the principle that nobody is above the law. If the effort fails, if partisan lines hold and Trump survives, it sends the opposite message: that the system lacks the teeth to enforce its own rules against those with resources to resist. The coming days will be decisive. The House appears poised to vote. The votes for impeachment seem to be there, possibly with enough bipartisan support to make it undeniably legitimate in a way previous impeachments were not. The Senate is the real question mark. 7 Republican senators are publicly in play. More might be privately considering their options. The trial, if it happens, will be unlike anything we have seen before. The evidence will be presented. The arguments will be made. Senators will have to sit in silence and listen. No phones, no staff, no escape. And at the end, they will have to vote. Not on what is politically convenient, but on what the evidence demands and what the Constitution requires. Some of them will make history with their votes. Some will break with their party. Some will probably end their political careers, and some might save them by being on the right side of a historic reckoning. The crowds outside will keep chanting, the media will keep broadcasting, the pressure will keep building, and at the center winner of it all, Donald Trump, will have to make the most consequential decision of his political life. Does he fight? Does he negotiate? Does he accept whatever outcome the constitutional process produces? His entire career has been defined by never backing down, never admitting defeat, never accepting outcomes imposed by others. But this is not a business deal or a political campaign. This is the constitutional machinery of the United States government, and it does not care about negotiation strategies or media cycles. It operates on its own logic, its own timeline, its own inexorable momentum. Fighting may not work this time, and if it does not, the presidency of Donald Trump will end in a way that no presidency has ever ended before. Not through election defeat, not through resignation under threat, but through the full, formal, constitutional process of impeachment and removal, history being written in real time, with all of us as witnesses.